Thank you for coming this afternoon to help us with this inquiry. You're key witnesses to explore some of the issues in forensic science provision. But before we start, can I ask you from my left to introduce yourself for the record, and if you want to say anything, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, we've got lots of questions for you, so we'll progress with them.
Okay, my name is Mark Pearce. I've been in the forensic science sector for 26 years as a practitioner, a manager and a leader. I'm currently commercial director for Eurofins in their forensics division. Eurofins is a €4 billion turnover international scientific services company providing forensic services in France, Belgium and Germany. A year ago, Eurofins acquired LGC's forensics division, creating Eurofins Forensic Services in the UK, who I work for.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm David Hartshorn. I'm the Managing Director of Cellmark Forensic Services. Cellmark is one of the three major providers of forensic services to the police. We have been in operation for about 30 years, and I've worked for Cellmark for that full amount of time across a range of disciplines. My original specialism was in DNA analysis, but I have been in the commercial sector of the organisation in more recent years.
Okay. Mr. Hackett?
Hello, yes, my name is Paul Hackett. I'm the former Managing Director of Key Forensic Services. I've also been in the forensic science sector for 25, 26 years or so. Started off at the Forensic Science Service. Key Forensic Services was formed in 2005 at the point where one would argue the forensic science sector began its journey of commercialisation. And it was on the basis of that Key Forensic Services was formed. I joined them in 2008, and we built the business from scratch effectively with a handful of forensic scientists up to the point where earlier on this year it went into administration, and we've since been bought out of administration by a company called Corpac, and now we're continuing to trade as Key Forensic Services.
Thank you very much indeed. So my question is obvious one that follows on your introduction. How sustainable is a forensic science service in England and Wales?
Okay, from my perspective, I guess we've probably all said the same thing actually, that the market is sustainable given the right level of funding. The market in its current form has been in existence for only 6 or 7 years post closure of the FSS, and in that time, because of austerity measures and because of other factors, we've seen a halving in the size of the market that's available for the private sector to serve. A combination of factors have led to that. The creation of more professional submissions units within police forces have allowed screening of submissions and paring back of submissions to the minimum, if you like, reducing the amount of work that's submitted to us. I guess there's been a little bit of insourcing, so police doing the work for themselves, although let's not get too carried away with the scale of that. Most of the work is still done by the private sector in England and Wales. But probably the biggest single factor that's created such an erosion of the market size has been multiple and repeated tender events on an organised scale, creating a very dominant customer who dictates very severe terms and conditions in contracts, but particularly waiting on pricing in tenders, such that we've seen a 30 or 40% erosion in pricing over 6 to 7 years.
The two of you want to add anything different from that?
I would concur with that fundamentally the market is sustainable with the appropriate levels of funding, and at the moment we're not seeing those levels of funding, which is putting everything at risk. And the reason why I think it's sustainable is because we have an established framework which is delivering very high quality forensic services to police forces across the country. And within our organisations we hold a huge body of experience of forensic scientists, some of whom who previously worked within the Forensic Science Service, some of whom who've been trained in more recent times, working alongside colleagues who have considerable expertise. And collectively we have a history of innovation, a history of efficiency delivery, and of delivering high-quality forensic services within a quality framework. And that's an established situation that we find at the moment.
Okay, well, I'll hear you, Mr. Hackett, first, then I go on.
I'd argue no. Without intervention, it's not sustainable. Key Forensic Services has demonstrated that we weren't able to survive as a business with the income we were getting from police contracts. So without some speedy intervention, financial intervention, the current market in its current form, in my opinion, is not sustainable.
Am I right in thinking you're the three key players in the market, or the only three players in the market?
We're the three largest multidiscipline providers.
Okay.
Yes, collectively we have in excess of 90%
And
market
yet
share.
you're competitors.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So
And yet, therefore, you bid for the market.
Yes.
So does the cheapest mean the cheap quality?
No.
So I think we'd all get quite passionate about this, that at the moment, whilst price has taken a disproportionately increasing weighting in tenders, depending on the work area, we have a fundamental principle and set of values that means we will not let quality suffer. That's a fundamental principle, and our accreditation, adherence to the regulators' codes of practice, and participation in what is, I think, actually European and possibly globally leading quality culture in forensic science in this country is a minimum standard to play in this area. And
I mean, if you look through the history of our organisations, we have a history of accreditation. Most of us go back probably 18 years holding 17025 accreditation, which is the standard that's used currently for assessing how forensic work is done. And yes, we are all suffering because of the lack of funding currently, but the key issue for us is not to let the quality of the work that we provide fall. Not only would we not want that to happen, none of our scientists would either.
So all three of you made the same point, that the market is sustainable as long as the funding is at an adequate level.
Slipped to levels that is not.
And all of you are saying the same thing, that the funding currently is not what you would consider adequate.
Exactly.
So you don't make much profit out of this.
No, we're currently losing money at the current situation. But on the point about quality, I think it's really important to notice that to participate in the marketplace, our three companies, there's a mandatory quality standard. So in order to bid for police contracts, we have to meet that standard demonstrably.
Okay.
It's a prerequisite to winning the contract in the first place.
Okay. Now, there's a lot of interest, and not only this question, but a lot of other questions. So both questions and answer will have to be targeted. So Lord Fox, Lord Valence, and Lord Caker.
So without causing undue pain to Mr. Hackett, if we could just put on record, because we can only report that which we get evidence for, the rescue process, as I understand it, that had you gone completely off the market, then there would have been a huge capacity problem within the service. Is that correct? And what did the market do in order to prevent that capacity leaving the market?
That's a big response, but I'll keep it very brief. Essentially, when I made the decision that the company could no longer continue trading and put it into administration, we spoke to a series of stakeholders, including Home Office, and at that point, because of the timing of it, the organisation wouldn't have been able to meet its payroll at the end of the January month. We had in excess of 1,000 active cases, so there was a requirement for both the police and the Home Office to act quickly, to provide the funding in order for us to wind the business down in an organised fashion. So to finish the cases we had in progress, to complete the work, to archive the work, to deal with the exhibits, and to manage the business to a controlled closure. That's what the funding was made available for. That took in the region of 3 months, and during that period we were pursuing every option possible to find a buyer. And so the wind down period created the opportunity to sell the business out of administration, and that's what happened.
Thank you very much.
What's the size of the market of which you make up 90%?
We think about 50-55 million.
50-50. Do you have any business apart from state business?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Is that significant?
It's not. It's a small percentage.
Okay, it's small.
Probably 5%.
So effectively, you've got the state as a monopsonist buyer in a 50-odd million market.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Does part of your this ability to participate in the market require you to provide professional development ongoing for your experts, one, and what form does that take, and two, to participate in some form of research to develop this field of expertise?
Yes, that's largely dictated by our quality accreditation, which requires us, A, to be able to demonstrate the competencies of all our staff, and that requires ongoing training and ongoing demonstration of their abilities throughout their time with us. In answer to your first part. In answer to the second part, we all carry out a good degree of internal development work as a requirement for us to remain competitive, but also to continue to hold our accreditation and to adapt to take on new technologies as they become available. Now, this isn't blue sky R&D, but this is the sort of development activity that's required to be able to validate whether it's a new DNA process or whether it's a new software that we need to be able to use to be able to interpret our results. We have ongoing a number of different development activities to make sure that the science continues to move forward.
I think
Pick up on Lord Caker's question, your answer. You talk about development activities, yes. But you said it wasn't the sort of really blue sky research. If you are looking at scanning the horizon for the scientific research that's going to be useful to your business and by extension the courts, or the courts and therefore your business, where would you look to see that being done if you're not doing it?
Well, I would argue that we are doing a fair amount of that on the basis of the fact that when you look at research and development that's going to assist in the presentation of our results in court, a lot of that is about interpretation. A lot of that a bit is understanding how these techniques work in forensic situations. You will hear reference to transfer and persistence studies so that we can understand and interpret the evidence and give the courts good direction as to the value of the analysis that's been undertaken. So we do some of that work on as individual organisations. We all are part of a grouping called the Association of Forensic Science Providers, who collectively fund some of this research as well. It's because it makes sense for us to share our resources since we face the same situations. And of course we are cognizant of our European partners as well, and looking within the literature of other areas of development. But we do quite a lot of work ourselves. Now, when you come to some of the more blue sky R&D activities, historically, a lot of this has been done outside of the forensic sector anyway, and our expertise in particular is taking existing technologies and applying them to a forensic situation. And that's largely what we have done and we continue to do.
Thank you.
It's Young, then Lord Hunt.
I was really just going back to the business of the operation of the market. There's price and there's quality and there's the viability of your organisations. I mean, how he's gone over the edge. How close to the edge are you? How close are you to the point of saying that the next ratchet down of price is going to prevent you from providing the right quality?
For our, well, I was going to say. So for our organisation, it very much depends on the work area. So some work areas are losing money basically. Others are making single-digit profit numbers. We regard no area as being at the right level of profitability to sustain reinvestment in innovation, continuous professional development, recruitment, etc. So the funding is falling short of where we need to be in every area. Some are in a position where if things go on, we will ask questions about continuing that particular type of forensic activity. Others aren't. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about accreditation. I mean, I think were you saying that actually to maintain your accreditation, you've got to be demonstrate that you're doing research.
Yes.
And that's quite unusual, isn't that right, in an accreditation process to actually have any sort of obligation to do research, and I wondered if you'd like to comment on that.
I think that's probably why I try to distinguish between blue sky R&D and development activities, which is still ongoing development. But the validation of any technique involves an awful lot of development activity, which is the sort of thing that we're talking about, as well as for us to be able to introduce new technologies into our organisations. That's also required.
I think the sector's done a lot. I mean, the regulators played a part in this to define what's required to launch a technique on the criminal justice system in terms of minimum validation studies. And as David said, we're a magpie research company, effectively. We take technology from other sectors and apply it to forensics. Most of our blue sky research will be done in partnership with academia, and that recognises the contribution and position each organisation will play in the sort of technology readiness capability scale.
Can I just ask you, I think we've discussed this with other witnesses. I mean, this is the question of the prosecution. Most of your funding is from prosecutions and not from defence. So, but there are other examples where lawyers there is no opposition, and therefore they help provide some legal or information advice to the defence. And I just wondered what your role is in, for example, as we discussed before, having some discussion chaired by the judge so that there's some understanding by both teams
what
the knowledge is, and is there something you do within your own budgetary limits?
So I think we play our full part, it was discussed earlier around criminal procedure rules, etc., and disclosure is a big part of case management for us. So we play our full part in disclosing all of the methods and the techniques that have led up to the evidence that we're providing. And that's as far as our obligations go. To get the most out of forensics and to understand what the evidence means in the context of the case, it's good practice to hold a case conference with prosecuting barristers and even to bring in defence scientists as well into that pre-trial conference. That doesn't happen a lot, but that's because we don't actually go to court in that many cases. Disproportionately large amounts of court visits are...
For the benefit of justice system, it should happen more often.
Yes, it should. It certainly should. It will avoid misunderstandings. It will improve the efficiency of trials potentially. So evidence isn't debated that doesn't need to be debated, and points of agreement can be found. So communication is all, and the pre-trial case conference involving forensic scientists and prosecutors and the defence is essential.
Could greatly be improved.
Yes, agree. Absolutely
could. I think it's also worth pointing out that probably within all our organisations we work in some instances for the defence as well as for the prosecution. And in fact, we at Cellmark have a separate grouping called Keith Borer Consultants, who are coming to talk to you later, who specifically focus on defence work. And so we understand the requirements for transparency, which is fundamental to the delivery of forensic science to the criminal justice system.
It's worth saying actually that our scientists do not consider themselves, they're working for the courts and don't consider, they're paid by the police. It's you could say it's semantics, but they're using their independent scientific rigour and ability to do deductive inferencing to give evidence to the court, to help the court make a decision. They're not really considering themselves as prosecution people.
Yeah, the frame of mind is one of unbiased independence. That's the purpose of the forensic scientist.
Okay. You did mention that you do get involved in R&D.
Yes.
If you do you publish this?
Yes.
And how widely is it available?
Across the scientific literature. So we attend conferences. We have a dedicated role, actually, that we've just appointed somebody to look at knowledge sharing across our companies.
Lord Kekar's supplementary, and then I'll move on to Lord Mayor.
Just very quickly, could you send us the list? Do you have a list of peer-reviewed publications
in
the last 2 or 3 years?
Yes, we do.
It'd be very helpful, I think, to receive that, to see the volume of evidence that you're providing.
Yeah, we can do.
Thank you. Well, the same applies to others.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I ask a bit more about this question of competing heavily on price, which is clearly a major issue. When you're bidding for work, what form does that take? Do the police ask you for a lump sum to do a particular investigation, or do you provide a schedule of rates for your scientific staff? How does it work?
So we talk a little bit through the history of procurement, and that it was mentioned earlier on when the Forensic Science Service was privatised. Associated with that was the development of some product codes for identifying the different bits of work that needed to be done in a forensic investigation, and the different product codes relate to different disciplines. And over time, through the various procurement exercises that we've been through, the number of product codes has exploded in number, which means that there's a very defined requirement associated that we have to put a price to for doing particular parts of the forensic process across all disciplines. And so when it comes to tendering exercises, we are assessed on the pricing that we put forward for those product codes, and that assessment of the price is considered against other elements of consideration regarding quality and service provision. And one of the concerns that we have seen over time is that the balance of price within the evaluation has risen, so that if you go back a few years, it used to be considered about 40% of the evaluation of a tender. Now it's 60%. and in some areas even higher than that, which means it's very difficult to differentiate a tender submission on anything other than price. It becomes the primary differentiator. Now, to complete the picture, we have seen some different tendering approaches very recently, where what you referred to as more a fixed price contract for an amount of work is starting to be seen as well. But even there, we have seen a downward pressure on pricing for the delivery of that type of contract.
I personally can understand and we can all understand the pressure on police budgets, so we can see the need to realise best value. It's just the balance between the effectiveness of the science and the case strategies that you put together and the demonstration of quality and R&D activity versus price. And I think we've had one or two tenders, certainly one that springs to mind relatively recently for us, where we've got a 60% weighting on price and 3 sides of A4 to describe our scientific approach and technical response to a homicide investigation, for example, when we've got all sorts of techniques to describe that will bring added value to that potential investigation. And it just feels slightly wrong that's the emphasis that's gone on this.
So when there's a specific call for tender, sorry, Chairman, just to follow up one more point, when there is a specific call for tenders,
yes,
what form does that take? Is that these various products that you've described, and you put as a price against each product, or is it asking for your proposals as to how you would do the investigation?
No. Generally speaking, what's put forward is the police forces who are procuring the work will say how much work they think there's likely to be over a period of time, and they will actually allow suppliers to bid on different disciplines. So we'll have a piece of work that might be particular violent crime investigations. They sometimes separate out DNA work, separate out other areas, but essentially they put forward a proposal to say this is the work that we're tendering, this is for how long, and these are the product codes associated with that. Can you put some prices to that along with how we would deliver them?
The state of the nation at the moment is about half the country has gone for this very commoditised approach with the long list of product codes that David describes. The other half of the country have done something slightly different, and each region or force, again, there's slight variations, but have taken a different approach to trying to get a little bit more out of innovation and partnership working, use that word advisedly, and by partnership working they're making a nod towards forensic strategy, etc. But it's still, even the partnership contracts that we have are still underpinned by quite toxic terms and conditions, and still an approach to pricing that has led us to the position that we're in now. But there are different approaches, so it's not you can't just say everybody does one particular style of procurement.
There are different approaches, but I think it's fair to say that the price erosion that we've seen over a number of years has largely been driven by procurement-based, by product code procurement. We're seeing some slight different approaches now, but the pricing has been sliding for a number of years.
Lord Oxford.
The conversation has moved on slightly from before, but you've all mentioned the importance of European work for your businesses. Could we get some sort of feeling for what fraction of your business comes from European or indeed overseas in general? And really the second question is, would you be viable without it?
Well, I'll take this one first if you like.
We'll go along the line.
I mean, we are now owned, as I mentioned before, so Eurofins took over or acquired LGC's forensics business, which was a UK private sector company a year ago, to blend, if you like, and create a larger division of forensics which serves France, Germany and Belgium primarily, but also we do work for the Dutch state as well. So there's a slightly different model in all of those countries. So almost every other country in the developed world, including Europe, of course, has a state provision of forensics as its core. And so most of the private sector services that we provide there are looking at overspill work from state labs where there's backlogs, that kind of thing. We're talking police, law enforcement work.
Just to clarify that most of the other countries have a state operating forensic services.
Yes. So
and so the private sector in these countries get their business from the state operating services.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and so what we've established to varying degrees in different countries throughout Europe is the concept of a delivery partner model where you get the best of private sector efficiencies, turnaround time, service levels versus state lab infrastructure.
So you're saying the model of a state-operated service with the private sector involvement is a good model?
It's a model that works, certainly. We would argue that the state labs across Europe could be recognising their limitations, if you like, or their business position more and work together in partnership better.
Okay. Lord Fox.
Both models have pros and cons. I won't go into that.
Okay.
In terms of answering the question regarding how much of our business is from Europe, at Key Forensic Services, probably less than 1%. We're largely UK focused, working exclusively with UK law enforcement.
And in answer from Selmark's perspective, again, very similar. About 1% of our revenue is overseas. About 80% is prosecution based in the UK. We do defence work, and we also do some other areas of testing as well.
Okay. Lord Fox, a quick one, Lord Valence.
Dr. Pearce's toxic conditions. You mentioned that half of your contracts are the kind of the price list variety. Mm-hmm. Is that half by value, half by number of police authorities, or what? And the other point is how regularly are these rebid, and are they rebid on a winner takes all per police authority? Because that clearly puts pressure on you to drive the price down regularly because loser loses everything in those situations. So is the nature of the tendering also putting pressure on you price wise?
Yeah. So in terms of the percentage of commodity list approach that we talked about, it is about half in terms of numbers, and that equates to about half in terms of revenue, I guess, as well, very approximately. In terms of winner takes it all, yes, there have been some winner takes it all. The half of the country actually that operate the commodity approach split the work. So they operate a lot system where a supplier gets a percentage of the work based on their bid. Other regions have taken winner takes it all, as you say, and others have taken the approach of having a majority winner, but the obligation on that winner to actually outsource to exactly, so tier 2 type suppliers.
And how often are these being rebid?
And again, it varies. So the commodity type focus is typically 3 to 4 years, and then some of the more partnership, as I described yesterday, brackets with some interesting terms and conditions associated, are typically longer, so 5 or 7 years typically.
But most of the tenders are 3 to 5 years, 3 with a couple of years of extension possibility.
And they're phased differently, or do they all tend to come up?
Well, therein lies some of the difficulty. And one of the reasons we all find ourselves in some problems at the moment is that towards the back end of last year, back in 2016, about 75% of all the police work in the country went out to tender at the same time. Which meant that 2017 was particularly...
So if you've got 2/3 or 80% of your revenue at risk, then naturally that's going to drive certain behaviours in a commodity market which is based on price. You cannot afford to lose. The alternative to losing the tenders for us was to go into administration 12 months earlier, because we'd have gone bust. And so it drives... The procurement methodology and the structure of the market has driven certain behaviours. The frequency of tendering, the large volume of tendering, the potential swings between the businesses. It's a perfect storm, and it's led us to this crisis. What we need is the pendulum to swing back a little bit more in the previous direction.
Somebody mentioned monopsony earlier, and I think that's the word that I would certainly use. And just to be clear on these toxic terms and conditions, so we are talking by and large, and it is typical, I guess, of public sector tendering, of zero indexation. So obviously wage costs go up, cost of accreditation, as the standards rightly are raised by the regulator, have gone up. So we've got zero indexation. We've got service credits, which are penalties on delivery times, which vary according to contract. But when you add up service credits and indexation, etc., on top of falling prices, you end up with what I call an unsustainable toxic set of conditions. It is.
Just the monopsony list. I mean, this is a classic distorted, lopsided market where you've got a hugely powerful buyer, and in this case, anything but powerful suppliers. It's usually the other way around. You have a monopoly who is a great supplier, and the other way around. I mean, this sort of thing, in a way, should be something for an economic regulator.
if it had been a monopoly, it would have gone straight into an economic regulator. And there are classic ways of trying to mitigate the distortion between the two. Would it be helpful, for example, if you had longer term contracts than you have at the moment? And would it be helpful if you had, for example, tariffs which are based on an expected return rather than those which are just competitive between three minnows with a great big shark up there?
I think we're very keen to see some level of rate card setting for the services that we provide, which include an element of profitability, because at the moment, as all have explained, it's extremely difficult economic times with lack of profit to be able to further invest into the organisation.
I think the longer term contracts are very good for one particular reason, and that is around joint innovation and innovating, developing products, and then allowing us to pilot them with those forces. But the problem is it's the winner-take-all scenario that Lord Fox mentioned, and so we have to come up with a procurement structure that mitigates against that winner-takes-all. And so the Tier 1, Tier 2 suppliers, the minimum level of subcontracting, that kind of thing, is a tool, for example, that could help with that.
I think where we've seen multi-supplier contracts, it removes some of the stress from the tendering process, because single supplier, all very well if you win if they're longer, but if you don't, then you're out of that market or that for a long period of time.
So we have an issue with state procurement, Jim.
Baroness Young, did you have a quick one, or can I pass on?
It's very quick. Mr. Hackett mentioned that the sorts of services, state-operated services internationally, had benefits and disbenefits, and I just wonder if we could ask all three witnesses to write to us with their perceptions of which services elsewhere work better.
Yeah, that would be good to get evidence.
In other countries, yeah.
Well, I would say, and it's not on behalf of the UK, actually, on behalf of England and Wales, countries in Europe look to us in terms of standards. The position of the regulator per se is one of envy. I sit on, as Paul does, I think.
But I mean, if you can write to us, tell us
Absolutely. Because otherwise, it would be a long answer. We'd be out of the.
Absolutely.
Okay. Can I move on to Lord Renfrew, please?
Thank you. There's been a forensic science regulator for 10 years now. What role do you feel she should ideally have? And the government 2 years ago announced the intention that she should have a statutory position, and if those powers were to be introduced by law, what do you feel they should be?
I think probably we are all in agreement in as much as we support the regulator having statutory powers to set standards and then to enforce them. And for the major providers, that doesn't represent any concern, because we've been accredited for a good number of years and will continue to be so. I think we have interest in seeing a level playing field of quality standards across the forensic provision in the UK, which would be of assistance, and if the regulator had powers to be able to ensure that was the case, then that would be a good thing.
Thank you. And do you feel that she is fulfilling her role? We did hear one evidence last week that one of our witnesses said they didn't really see why she needed statutory powers.
Well,
that's the last.
No. I think from my perspective, if you look at what the regulator's been doing, given the resources, it's a fantastic job, and it is a role that our European colleagues look to. We've had standards, ISO 17025. We introduced them into forensic science first in the world. We're the first in the world to develop the role of the regulator. So I think all the benefits of that would be agreed and are recognised. What I think we're seeing is that voluntary deadlines for those participating in the wider marketplace, whether it be the police or smaller private providers, people are not adhering to voluntary deadlines, and therefore the cajoling and the soft words and the carrot isn't working. And so the regulator needs some teeth now to ensure that it is a level playing field, to ensure that quality standards are maintained by everybody who is participating in the criminal justice system. That isn't the case any longer. We've seen deadlines missed by lots of different entities in practising in the criminal justice system.
Okay. Thank you.
Lord Thomas.
You tell us a lot about your research and development role. Could I ask you one or two supplementary questions about it? The first relates to all of you collect huge data banks. The FSS had its own. To what extent do you pool your data banks?
YSTR is perhaps a good example.
Yes, exactly, YSTR. So there's a subset of DNA database that we're working on together, that we commission together as the Association of Forensic Science Providers that David mentioned. And that association actually serves as a non-commercial organisation that pulls together members from Northern Ireland, Scotland and Ireland actually, as well as the private sector from England and Wales, to talk about issues of best practice, proficiency trials, and the common use of data where appropriate.
Yeah, but what about the data you actually have? Because this obviously goes to the funding of it. Do you pool the data that is your intellectual property?
Depends very much on the data. There's quite a lot of constraints on us in terms of certain types of data.
Now, for example, if you take footwear, do you pool, or in mixtures on DNA, do you pool the information that you've got from the tests you've done, so that one can actually test the reliability using your collective knowledge, as the FSS used to do?
Yes, in fact, with footwear in particular, then we're sharing data or having access to data from police forces as well.
Yeah, and does the fact, therefore, you can't sort of earn any intellectual property monies go to part of the model that one has to look at in financing this?
Yes, I suppose it does. I mean, certainly we haven't. We're not saying that our intellectual property model is being taken down by the lack of ability to own data. That's not the way the scientific community in forensic science has worked in the past.
And therefore, in research, the same approach is you pool all your knowledge of new techniques, so there's no, in contradistinction to other areas, there's no intellectual property that you earn from your activities.
We work no differently to any other area of science in that respect. We publish peer-reviewed papers and declare our research at conferences, etc.
The criminal justice process demands that of us anyway, for disclosure to the defence.
And so everything is disclosed, unlike in the US in certain instances where things aren't disclosed and kept private. And then on research, who do you see as the best or the best method of carrying out much more detailed research? For example, footwear is one sort of, whether you call it science or not, and you go then to DNA, which is a science. How do you think, bearing in mind the extraordinary width of forensic work, and I've taken out the word science, do you think research in these different areas, which differ vastly, ought to be done?
For me, there's three levels really that we work. There's primary blue sky research that will develop the next technique to replace something new that's fundamentally different. Mm-hmm. You've then got method development and technique modification to make something more sensitive or more effective that leads to more prosecutions. And then you've got process efficiency developments that mean that throughputs are quicker, etc. And so the three sort of work together. Our role, as David and Paul mentioned earlier, we're a very applied science. We don't do blue sky research, and that's not how we see ourselves really. When we would like to work in partnership with people who are better positioned to do blue sky research, such as academia, and then we take techniques and commercialise them. And what's broken at the moment is that there's no sort of definition of everybody's role in that chain and how those parties will apply for funding. And actually, when you apply for funding, how do you demonstrate the benefits to a system that actually isn't as good as, for example, the medical industry or pharmaceutical industry, who can say very specifically that this drug will save 10,000 lives and X hours in hospitals, and it's very easy to quantify the benefits of the system. That's not the way we've worked in the past, and that's a failing, but it's a limitation of applying for crisp funding for a particular technique, and that's something we could all do better.
Did you want to add anything, Mr. Haggard?
The only thing I'll add is that there is a particular expertise of all the scientists that work within our organisation for the application of the science that we're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And that's why there is a requirement, or I think it works best, that some of that R&D is done very close to the coalface, because critically our scientists are undertaking vast amounts of forensic science every day. I mean, collectively we are doing tens of thousands of investigations a year across the organisations, and our scientists are very close to understanding some of the interpretational issues that we need and some of the limitations of the technologies that we've got. And so when it comes to testing the analysis that we have, and also testing our understanding of how they perform in particular ways, they're particularly well positioned to be able to lead on some of that work.
Mr. Hank, do you want to add anything?
I don't think there is one body or group or entity that's got the kind of helicopter view. There are so many different stakeholders with so many different drivers on them. I think R&D, if we're collectively talking blue sky research, but also the developmental activity, the emphasis will change, in my view, on who should drive and lead that, depending on what the R&D is and whether it's push or pull from the market, whether it's technology driven, or whether it's development work from within the laboratory. So it's a hodgepodge at the moment.
Thank you.
Lord Borwick.
Digital forensics. We've heard so much evidence of vast terabytes of information coming through, and we're all going to be under 2 foot of data. But surely this is a process where the speed of processes is going up so much faster than the quantity of data, that actually this is a field, as computers get faster, it should actually get easier rather than harder. And with the introduction of artificial intelligence, isn't there automated ways of dealing with the quantities at the inside of mobile phones that give lots of
I would agree with you. And I think the issue for me, if you pare it back, if we look at any other situations, let's stick to forensics rather than any other sector, if we look at how this market has developed since the early 90s, we look at the introduction of different technologies. Let's take DNA profiling. We brought DNA profiling to the world in this country. We're the first to have a national DNA database. That DNA database was hugely successful. Demand outstripped capacity. As a result, there was investment in robotics. We invented the first robots in the world for this process. We invented software to solve complex, and we led the world. And we led the world because there was an incentive, there was a drive, and there was funding. There was a reason to do it. And I don't see the same. Drivers. Who's pushing the technology drive in artificial intelligence, in digital forensics in the UK? Who?
Yeah.
Nobody.
From our perspective, we sort of recognise our part in this. So I think it was in a previous session, I think somebody was commenting on the amount of work relatively done by the police versus the private sector. So to answer that question, from our perspective, the vast majority is done by the police. So it's high-tech crime units, departments within the police, sometimes and historically have sat outside of forensics actually, have made it a technical exercise to interrogate phones and computers from a forensic point of view to find out what's stored on them and what's happened. And obviously, as you say, the amount of material has grown exponentially, and the appetite for those kind of examinations has grown to the point where the police have backlogs and can't cope, and transforming forensics as the NPCC initiative to try and pull together a coordinated approach to forensics in this country has an arm of activity to look at a forensic digital strategy, and that will be very good. Our role in the private sector is an emerging role. I think we as an organisation have 17025 accreditation for phones and computers, and are sitting waiting for demand from unaccredited police labs that doesn't arrive. Why that is the case, not so sure. And certainly I think the market and the community, perhaps through transforming forensics, could take a much more joined up approach, where the private sector can act as a delivery partner for the public sector in the same way that we talked about the European examples earlier for core forensics and traditional forensics. But that's not there yet. So we have a very small emerging business that we're not sure whether to invest in or not, to be honest, because we're not seeing, when there's no incentive, we're not seeing the promises follow through in terms of promised demand.
So all we can see now is the problem, but not
yes, and I think the private sector could assist, but at the moment there is no outsourcing strategy for digital work, and therefore, as Mark says, at the moment there's no great incentive to invest at the moment.
Okay. What about in other countries, in America and elsewhere in Europe? Is there any more growth and development happening there?
I can't comment specifically on digital, but certainly from being a member of the European Network of Forensic Institutes, which covers all the European EU countries, we're ahead of the game when it comes to delivering forensic services, whether that be we don't have any backlogs, whether it be in speed of delivery, whether it be in quality standards. So people turn to us for advice and guidance. How do you achieve these miraculous high quality standards and phenomenal turnaround times. They've got months of backlogs, and we do things in days they couldn't dream of. And so that's general forensic science. Whether there's anything we can learn for them specifically in digital, I'm not seen or heard anything.
Okay.
Now, I might guess the answer to the next question is an important question. Baroness Manningham.
I think I can guess the answer. Maybe most of the committee can, but give you a few minutes to think about it if you need it. But a short recommendation that any of you would like to, each of you would like to see as one of our recommendations in our report. And if one of you says one which the other agrees with, that's fine. But a single recommendation for you each. You may have 20, but can you confine it to one?
We thought about this.
We thought about it.
We have one between us.
Is this a coordinated response?
It is indeed.
It's one recommendation, but one word, and that's funding.
And I think it's important to mention that it's funding not only for prosecution forensic work, but also for work done by the defence, because that's a very good fail-safe check within the criminal justice system. And the legal aid authority funding at the moment, as we know, has been cut to unsustainable levels as well. So funding across the board is what's required to support the expertise that we have in this country, which has just been described as excellent,
Okay.
but our problem is sustainability.
I'm going to actually ask you to say a little more. I know time is tight, but we can't put down recommendation 3, funding.
Yeah.
What do you want us to say?
Yeah. For me,
I mean, okay, increase legal aid, but,
Yeah.
but
From
for
my-
this area particularly.
So from my point of view, it's there's a timing issue here because we need funding very quickly. But actually what's required over the medium term is for the whole criminal justice system and the agencies within the criminal justice system to recognise forensic science as a vehicle to realise efficiencies in the investigation process and in the courts. Guilty pleas, early detections of individuals, etc., rather than a burden on police departmental budgets. There's the wrong approach. A pound spent on forensics can save tens of thousands down the line in guilty pleas and therefore the averting the need for a trial. So it's that understanding across the agencies and the analysis of that in a recognised, published way that people can use to justify investment.
Thank you. Mr Hackett, you're nodding. Do you want to say anything
I'm
more?
concurring violently with Mark. I mean, just because I like the sound of my own voice and want to embellish on that, I think Mark's spot on. But in the short term, it's price increases. We have contracts now with all the police forces, and that is a vehicle in the very short term to increase the charges for the services we deliver. That would solve the immediate crisis. And then I think we need to look at alternative methods of procuring forensic science. And Mark's absolutely right. The budget is held by the police force carrying out the investigation. The benefits are often recognised further down the supply chain in the courts and by the CPS. And until somebody takes a holistic view and recognising that money spent over here can save tenfold the money over here, nobody's going to see the bigger picture. And sadly, that's what we're missing. The holistic picture is gone. The umbrella, helicopter view, call it what you like. So nobody anymore seems to know what's going on with the left hand and the right hand, and we're all competing in silos, and every chief constable is doing whatever they can to save money, quite rightly, because that's their target, and that impact does not take a collective view, and that's the big problem we're in right now.
Can I just come back just to nuance the funding bit a little bit, because the issue about increased pricing is absolutely right, because we've got to a critical point and we have to protect the integrity of the forensic service division that we have. At the moment we have staffing across our organisations who are leaving the industry because they're better paid in teaching than they are in doing forensic science. I mean, there is, that's an example, but there are serious concerns about maintaining our scientific base. But just increasing the prices for the individual product codes and the services we provide is one thing, but fundamentally, part of our problem is about volume as well. We are seeing, because of austerity and police cuts in budget, we're seeing restrictions in the amount of work that's being submitted. So we're seeing crimes that aren't being investigated, or forensic work isn't being done to the extent that it could be or should be. And a combination, when we have the fixed overheads that these organisations do to be able to provide good quality forensic science, we really need to make sure that we've got some of the volume going through them as well. So it's not just about increasing the prices for units, but also to use forensics better to save elsewhere in the criminal justice system.
Thank you.
So in a case, would you be aware that the police has not requested you to do certain forensics and pay for it?
Think of,
but are you then aware that if the police will only ask to do certain other forensics, this case might be handled better?
Yes. Well, they have budgetary constraints. They are struggling to work with a reduced budget.
The question is not that. The question is, are you then aware that if only they would ask us to do different forensics, this case would be settled better?
Sometimes. So the forensic science is one giant funnel, and it starts with the event, the crime, and the recognition of the crime occurs. You've then got attrition at every single step. Do we send a scene of crime officer? Yes, no. Do we investigate the crime? Is the force policy to follow up on car crime, burglary? So we see massive attrition at the crime recording level. You've then got a decision internally. If we send somebody, do they collect the evidence? If they collect the evidence, do they submit the evidence? Which evidence do they submit? We wouldn't be cited on all the evidence that was collected or not even collected. So we get a very, very tunnel vision, a very tiny view of what actually has gone on in that event. And so we wouldn't know whether other evidence was available or not unless it's written on the submission form, which isn't always the case.
But we can see that some forces aren't investigating some crime or can't using some techniques as opposed to others because we work with multiple police forces and we see the differences.
It's also about
10-second question and a 10-second answer.
Would it be a good thing to have longer-term contracts with some fixed element in that as a contribution to your fixed costs and a variable element according to the amount of business you did?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sensible.
Great.
Need an advice on better business model here.
Yes.
Yeah.